The people crisis. Basically, we as world has a problem. For the most, it ain't gonna have enough people in the future. That's the whole problem. Like, for undeveloped countries like Chad, the place that I live, a couple other places, this isn't a problem because the average number of kids per family is 5 to 6, which is a whole lot. Imagine having that many siblings. For these countries it's the opposite problem, and I'm telling you this so we can understand the problem we're having in other countries. So these countries have the problem population blowing up basically, and this problem stems from the fact they're in underdeveloped country. The people, for their own futures, have a lot of kids so that those kids can support them in the future, because the average income per kid isn't much in these countries, and kids tend to die, which is sad, but that happens and I have to talk about it, which affects the family a lot. That's why countries in general, again it's a big in general, that are less developed tend to value the number of kids over the quality of kids. Like, even the country that I live in has this problem in more rural areas. I know people who have had families which had 6 children, and that's a thing that happens in less developed countries, which causes their populations to skyrocket, which is again a problem, because the more people you have, the less value an individual person has. The less jobs you can get, the less you can do as a person, which obviously isn't a good thing. That's the world they have to live in, and because these countries aren't developed, they don't have that many opportunities. The fewer opportunities are divided among even more people. That's one of the reason why the country that I live in, which is incredibly overpopulated, demands so much of kids. Like, in your country, I mean, if you're from America, from what I have gathered, obviously pressure is pressure, but it isn't as much pressure as here is, because here failing even once, that's the end of your life right then and there. Like, if you fail a grade, that's the end, as far as I know. In other countries it's that extreme, but of course I have never traveled to other countries, so the hell do I know. Moving on from overpopulation to population decline. Now, as you have heard, countries that are less developed tend to have more children. This pattern can be followed in the opposite direction. Countries that are more developed, for example, South Korea, China, Japan, Germany, America, and many other countries like these, have their population basically evaporating. And of course, if the people of a country disappear, so does that country. Now, for a stable population, you need 2.1 children per family. For if that's the fertility rate, you have a stable fertility. Your population does grow, but very slowly, which is of course what you want. Not too fast, not stagnant, not declining. That's what every country wants. But that's not what these countries provide, because the more developed the country is, the cost of living is more expensive. You want more things, you need more things to live in a place where you want to live, because if you want to live in a city, it's hard to live there, and you want your kids to have a better life, you want to have things. This environment creates a burden on wannabe parents, which causes them to not have kids. And this affects the total number of people that you're going to have year after year, which again is the problem, because if you don't have people coming year after year, well, then the country becomes very top heavy, and by that I mean the majority of the population becomes older people. And I tell you, grandma ain't having kids. That's just a fact. And these majority older people aren't productive. Of course, I don't have anything against the elderly. We all are trying to live on this rock. And that's why I want to communicate this problem in a clear way so everyone, no matter, what your standing is, can understand the problem, and we as a society can come together and come up with a solution to this problem. But as a country sense, they aren't productive. In fact, they create a burden on younger people. And it is not to say that these older people don't suffer. I mean, the poverty rates in older people are increasing in these countries because younger folks can't support them, because there aren't enough young folk for older folk to be supported. Like, some countries provide welfare programs which work on taxes and other that are taken from young folks, which creates burden on these young people and supplies the older folks. I'm pretty sure you're a pretty smart person and you can probably guess the problem. If you don't have young people, you don't have welfare. And if you don't have welfare, well, everyone's screwed. So, as a country becomes top heavy, older people become more common, as in they become the majority of the voters. And for democratic countries, this is a problem, because if the majority of the voters are older people, then you don't really have to listen to young folks' opinion, and you can basically ignore them, even though they are the foundation of a country. And since these countries tend to ignore the young folks because the country's top heavy, it creates a vicious cycle, because these older folks tend to want for their own benefit, which is understandable, because if I were in their position, I would do the exact same thing, which isn't good for young folks, because, well, their incentives don't align. Now, this has been combated in countries which have severe population shortage, like South Korea, which is, the main figurehead for this entire conversation. It's not that it is the only country facing this problem. It isn't. Germany is also facing this problem. France is facing this problem. The United States. The main reason the United States hasn't been affected by this problem fully, even though their fertility rate is about 1.6 to 1.7. This number is low enough that it can be subsidized by the immigrants. And let me be clear, immigrants don't solve this problem. At best, they act as a speed bump and prevent the problem at hand. Just roll the can down the street. Because even if immigrants come from a country which has a very high fertility rate, their fertility drops down to the average level for the country in about 2 to 3 generations. So, this isn't a permanent fix. It's just a temporary fix, which isn't the case in other countries which have severe problems with this. Now, moving back to Korea. Korea has a very severe problem. Like, it is fairly likely that a couple won't have kids rather than having a single kid, because the culture there incentivizes putting your job over everything, which creates incredible strain on a family. It's mostly a cultural thing that has affected this country, and because, as I mentioned, most developed countries have a problem, and this is exacerbated because of their culture, which just doesn't allow them to, have children. This is a problem even in Japan, because their people are fairly overworked, and that is why most of the people are virgins until their 30s. In these countries, people don't have the time to create a family. But yeah, that's the problem. And now, this entire idea that I've presented here doesn't explain China's problem, because China is facing the exact same problem, and it's not a democracy. And a report I heard, which it's kind of hard to believe, but by the end of this decade, China was projected to have dropped in population down to 800 million. And of course, it will be very top heavy. And this is just a projection. But I want to talk about how did we get here. So, the problem was they had overpopulation, like everyone was having 6 kids, because they were very underdeveloped. in the long, long ago. But then they introduced the one child policy, which, as a tangent, led to there being like substantial gender imbalances there. Like there were significantly more men in China than there are women because, well, if you have one kid, what would you like, a boy or a girl? And I guess the majority of China chose boys. So because of that, a decent chunk of population would probably never find a partner, which was addressed by the government later on as they loosened the one child policy. And this is just going to exacerbate the already existing problem even more. But that's besides the point. As you know, the country expanded, this one child policy significantly changed, the dynamics. And that's why it had such a significant population problem right now. So, what can we do about this? I guess just have more kids. The answer is just have more kids. That's just not the answer. Society as a whole has to change. That's the only solution. Have is for society to make it easier to support and have kids, because this generation is going to face a lot more problems in the future because the previous generation screwed up big time. And those problems will probably lead to less kids because, well, another factor in all of this is guilt. Do you really want you to be responsible for screwing over your own kid's life? And that's a thought that passes through some people. And I get that because honestly, if I had the choice, I would rather not. But, it's also that they could have a better, brighter future. And they can only have a brighter future if we, the current generation, do something about it. And that's why I wanted to, talk about it, raise a bit of awareness, because this is a problem that is, for now, on the horizon, but it is going to be there for long. It will come and bite us, and it has one hell of a bite. So before it bites us, we gotta get this dog under control. So we, as a society, have this problem, and I think as a society we can solve this problem. That's about it from me. Bye.